Hello, peoples. Welcome to Talking with Tracey, the ride to self-love. I'm Tracey. So today's episode was unplanned. It is totally impromptu. I decided maybe about an hour ago that I was going to do this. It is July the 27th today, and it's the day after someone who helped me in my own recovery actually passed away. Sinead O'Connor. Much of her music was extremely meaningful to me, but even more so than her music, her life story and her experiences, her book, her rawness, what she allowed the public to see of herself. I related to so much of it, and I was always cheering for Sinead in the background to overcome and to succeed. I've loved her since the moment I first was introduced to her music. I loved her passion. I loved her standing up to the patriarchy. I loved everything that she stood for. And so I've decided to do an episode today. I guess this is kind of in homage to her, because I'm going to do an episode today on mental health and loving ourselves. This is a topic that is extremely dear to myself. Anyone who's read my book knows that I talk about that aspect in length in my book. And I want to talk about it from the place of self-love. So how we can experience our mental health issues from a place of self-love, how we can treat ourselves better with it, speak to ourselves better with it, all of that stuff. So myself, just to give you a little bit of quick background on myself with mental health issues, I would say that my mental health issues really started to develop when I was age 14, age 15. I really started, I believe the depression kind of started around age 14. I had my first suicide, my only suicide attempt at age 15. Not my only suicidal thoughts, but my only attempt was when I was 15 years old. And it was after I had come forward and told someone about my abuse from when I was younger, and right before the abuse started from the teacher. Actually, the teacher was the person who I came forward and told about the abuse. I had the suicide attempt, and then with a month of that, the abuse with the teacher started. So I dealt with mental health issues in high school. However, that's also exactly when my addiction started. So I started using drugs and alcohol mostly during high school, to be honest. I mean, I did a lot of psychedelic drugs and things like that, but my pot use didn't get heavy until years later, and chemical use and stuff. So for me, that was my first dealing with my mental health issues was when I was 15 years old. I started in counseling at that age. My mother made me, the hospital made me. I got out of the hospital as quickly as I could when it all happened. I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to deal with it, but my mom did get me into counseling, and I did start to talk about it, which helped a great deal at the time. Fast forward, so me, addiction, party through all of high school after that. Fast forward to about age 21 or so, and long-term chronic depression started for me then. That is when I would spend many a day, often day after day after day, in tears and having no idea why. And anytime I went searching for the answers, I couldn't find them. And so I experienced depression. And I did try some different medications, and none of them were working, and none of them were doing what I needed at the time. So if you're familiar with depression at all, you know that there is not one antidepressant that works for everyone, because everyone has different reasons of why they're depressed. For me, years later, I found out it was an SSRI that would help me. So that means my serotonin was not releasing properly. And so because an SSRI helps me, like it was night and day when I tried a drug at the time called Celexa, and it was night and day for me. So yeah, I spent it like a decade like that. And then I found Celexa. So during that time, there was symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and severe symptoms of chronic depression. And then at age around 33 or so, 2005, I had a massive breakdown. And when I say massive, I mean like I spent 5 weeks in the psych hospital. I went in and out of the hospital numerous times. Every time I went to the hospital, they actually diagnosed me with something different, and they kept changing my medications and stuff. I had a temporary psychosis is ultimately what it was, but the doctors were diagnosing it as all sorts of things. In their defense, I was not honest with my doctor about the amount of drugs I was taking. I had been taking a lot of chemical drugs at that time. I'd also been taking a lot of psychedelic drugs at that time, and I was not honest with the doctors about it. So I had this massive breakdown, and the psychosis effects, like me feeling paranoid and not trusting anyone and all that kind of energy, lasted for a number of years, like really like 3 years or so, and severe PTSD from that incident, and PTSD from the end of the relationship, which that was part of. So that breakdown didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened when things blew up in my home life. And so that is what I would say is the height of my mental health issues. I then ended up homeless after that for a short period. And then I ended up doing my adventure down to the United States, and I started working on healing. And that's when I had my first taste of recovery and stuff. And so for me, some important things out of this. Number one, if we need medication, we should never feel embarrassed about having to take medication or to feel like it's something that somehow makes us less than. When other people are sick, they take medication. For me, it was mental health issues, depression. It was amazing the difference. Like, it was night and day when I started on Celexa. I went from being absolutely miserable and literally, like, I was suicidal on and off through that whole time over 10 years. I constantly was thinking about ending my own life, and that's a horrible way for someone to live. I can relate to some of what Sinead O'Connor talked about, wrote about, and was honest about. You know, she had been abused by her mother. She was diagnosed as bipolar. She was diagnosed as borderline personality. She was diagnosed as PTSD. And so she dealt with these issues throughout her life in a career that was very public. And that's why, so when I hear her story about being abused and having mental health issues, and then I listen to my own story about being abused and having mental health issues, I totally understand. And I work with so many women, and I know so many women as friends and people that I meet in the community who are in recovery, that this is a big part. Like, the mental health and the addiction stuff goes hand in hand often. They're very often extremely closely related. And it usually starts with trauma, then addiction and mental health issues follow. And the addiction is often to deal with the mental health issues. I know that's what it was for me. It was basically like self-medicated. So instead of dealing with the stuff that was hurting inside my head when I thought about it, and the stuff that was hurting in the pit of my stomach, the abuse I had received as a child, I instead numbed out to it. And that's what I did. I self-medicated. Now, what happened in my 20s and whatever during those 10 years of depression was that I was a very heavy pot smoker, and I swore up and down and sideways that pot was the only thing that kept me level, because when I didn't have it, my depression was way worse. When I did have it, it was often manageable. As it turned out, when I got clean and sober, after a few months of being totally clean and sober of any drugs and any alcohol, I came to the realization that for me, marijuana had actually been part of my depression. Marijuana is a known depressant. Alcohol is a known depressant. And funny enough, those were the two things that I was very attracted to because they actually mimic serotonin. So I had serotonin release issues. So I was attracted to alcohol, attracted to pot. Really, when you get down to the science of it, it makes total and 100% sense why those were the things that I was attracted to. And then I also got very much into ecstasy. And what ecstasy does is it releases all your serotonin at once, which is extremely dangerous if you have serotonin release problems. But I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was that I felt euphoric at the time, and I felt like everything was okay for at least those 8 hours or whatever. All of that is self-medicating. It's me trying to make myself feel better through these street drugs and things like that. I have compassion for the me who self-medicated for all of those years and didn't have a better answer. I can totally empathize and feel the energy when people are struggling with mental health issues. When I meet women who are in addiction and they really need coping tools because the addiction is covering up the trauma. And so when we come off the drugs, the alcohol, whatever substance we've been using, we have to at some point learn how to deal with the trauma, because it's going to be rising up to the top and we're going to be feeling it, and we're going to be experiencing those old memories that we've been pushing down for all of those years. This takes it takes work. It takes counseling. It takes self-compassion. For me, of all the things that happened in my life, the absolute worst was landing in the hospital for 5 weeks. My mental health, my mind is really important to me. I like my mind. And I can lose absolutely anything. I can and did lose my house, my marriage, my job, my friends, my dignity, my everything. But losing my mind, that's irreplaceable. I can get a house back. I can get a car. I can get people. I can get a marriage. I can get relationships. I can get all sorts of things back in my life. But if I don't have my mind, it's almost impossible to get any of those things back. And so it was the scariest thing. And to be quite honest, my mental health is the thing that's kept me sober over the years, because I do very well. Myself, I'm very blessed. I do extremely well. If I stay clean and sober and get a proper amount of sleep and eat my food properly, and I get out and get some exercise and get the endorphins going and have a spiritual program for myself, this keeps me balanced. This has kept me out of mental health issues for years. I haven't had to take any prescription medication, no antidepressants. For those who still do, who do all of those things and still have to take some sort of medication, that's okay. You take it. It helps you. It's just like someone, who's got cancer takes medication, and someone who has heart problems takes medication. Someone with any kind of a mental imbalance or mental issues that they're dealing with, also, it's just like anything else, and so is addiction. So we find the medicine that works and we take it. Unfortunately, so many of us chose to self-medicate, and what I was self-medicating with, as it turned out, was making it worse. The pot was truly causing part of the depression. So while it was covering up and allowing me to push down all the emotions, it was a depressant and causing me to be more depressed. And I never realized that. It took me a long time to realize that, and it took me sobriety to realize that. Because I like I said, I would have argued till I was blue in the face that it was the only thing keeping me balanced. And maybe in a way it was at the time, because I'm still here, I'm still alive, and I'm able to tell this story. However, in the big picture, it wasn't doing me a lot of good. It was part of the problem. I had to get to the root stuff. And so when we find any opportunities to get free counseling, to get into support groups, to read books that are helpful for ourselves, all of this stuff, do it. Journaling was hugely important for me in getting my mental balance back. Journal. I journaled everything. I wrote everything down. Something I like to say is that a journal is a poor man's psychologist, because quite honestly, if you go to counseling, a good counselor, what they do is say, well, how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts about that? What do you think you should do? In your journal, you can do the exact same thing. All you're doing is pouring your heart out. You're pouring your heart out in your journal, and then you give the answer of what you think you should do. How do you feel about that? And you work yourself to the answer of the problem, believe it or not. When I started journaling, I was doing it because I thought at the time that I was going to write a book. And this is like way back in 2006 that I started doing it. Didn't write my book until 2019. But that's what was in my head at the time. I had no idea that the universe really had me journaling so that I could work through the psychosis stuff that was happening at the time. It was amazing how I was able to work through what had happened in my marriage, able to work through what was happening with me personally, able to work through my sobriety eventually, and all of the healing and a relationship with God and with the universe, so that I could create a spiritual program for myself. I say a spiritual program for myself because what I believe isn't necessarily what everyone else believes, but it's a program that works for me. I talk to God, I talk to the universe, I believe in the angels and my ancestors. I actually believe in everything. I literally believe in everything. I think that it all is compatible, and I believe that all paths take us to the same place. So, but I came to those understandings through my journaling and through working through it. So, yeah. Now, let's say I was experiencing anxiety or PTSD, which is really rare for me, but something like that gets triggered, like a really old, and there are a couple of things that can push a button a little bit with me. When I experience that, instead of putting myself down for it, I put my hands over my heart. I love the me who's experiencing anxiety right now. I love her. And I send myself some love. It's not that I love that I'm experiencing anxiety, because I sure don't. But I love the one who is overcoming it. I love the one who is surviving it. And the same would go for anything else. If we were to experience depression, I love the me who still experiences depression, because my natural go-to is, what's wrong with you, Tracey? Why are you broken? Why aren't you like everyone else? This is the conversation that used to go on for me in regards to my mental health, because there's so much stigma around it. I would get really down on myself because I'm not normal like everyone else, because I was crying and I was sensitive, It turned out that I'm kind of empathic to other people's feelings. I felt what other people felt a lot, and it really hit me deeply. And that was something that affected how I felt too. It really helped me when I learned the difference between what I'm feeling and me feeling what someone else is feeling. Like someone else is sad, and then all of a sudden I'm in this spot where I'm not going to be okay if they're not okay. I'm actually able to differentiate those feelings now and recognize when the feeling belongs to me or when it belongs to someone else. And that helped me as well with depression and with emotional balance and all that stuff. For me, honestly, I had no idea. I got a message from the universe, like from God at first, that I was supposed to quit drugs and alcohol and smoking and caffeine. And I had no idea why at first. And I recognize now another message that came in not long after that was about sugar. And I didn't know why, but I'm extremely emotionally sensitive. Well, alcohol and nicotine and drugs and caffeine and sugar, they all do this with your energetic system. And what I mean by that is they shoot you up, which means you'll have a crash later, or they give you a crash, which means you'll have a boost up later. So instead of having a nice even keel on the emotions, for me, it was doing this when I participate in those kind of foods. So I try to be careful. It doesn't mean I don't ever have any sugar. I do stay away from caffeine. I do stay away from drugs and alcohol. I do stay away from nicotine, because all of those things were actually playing havoc with my energetic system, Yeah. So that's me and my story. That's how I kind of, like, at this point, it was when I started working on my self-esteem and my self-love, this was one of the places that I had to pour a lot of work into. And I mean a lot of work, a lot of journaling, a lot of workshops, a lot of books that I read about what other people experiencing similar things. I watched videos on the internet. I basically soaked in everything I could and then applied it to myself, because I felt really bad about the fact that I wasn't mentally stable. It really hit my self-esteem, because there's all this stigma around it. Well, as you can see, I'm totally okay with talking about it now today, because I recognize that just like any other illness, it's an illness. And some people, this is their illness. It can be bipolar, or people can experience manic depression, or people can experience PTSD and anxiety. There's a whole list of things on the mental health spectrum that people can experience. And the reality is that many of us feel broken because of the stigma in society until we heal it and work through it. And Sinead O'Connor, actually, which is why I'm doing this episode today, was a brilliant example of just that. She got scorned. She got criticized. Some people mocked her for what she went through. My heart just bled for her every time we were watching her have like a crisis publicly that the public was aware of. And I sent prayers for her, and I sent positive energy and healing, because I could totally relate to everything she was going through, and she had to do it all publicly. She spoke up against people who were doing bad things. She spoke up against abuse, and then she got scorned by the same industry that months before had loved her. You know, I remember when she stood up and ripped up the picture of the Pope on TV, I was watching it live with a group of friends, and we actually all stood up and cheered. And it's not necessarily about being anti-Catholic or anything. It was about being anti the establishment of the Catholic Church, which had been hiding things for centuries, hiding abuse, moving priests. I'm personally aware of so many people who were abused by priests. And here in Canada, we have the residential school system for the First Nations people, where there was a horrendous, horrifying amount of abuse done to children in the name of God. And so she was one of the first people who publicly got up and spoke about it and spoke out about it. Was before anyone was talking about it in the news, before the whole scandal hit later. A few years later, this whole thing blew up and everyone found out. But she was trying to bring it to our attention, and she got mocked and scorned for that. That affected her mental well-being. You know, here she was, embraced and loved. All she ever wanted was to be loved, and the world loved her because she came out with that song, Nothing Compares to You, and then people were exposed to all of her other music that she had already written, and everyone was embracing her. And then people turned on a dime because she spoke up and she spoke out about abuse. Well, I'll tell you what, like almost all of the people I know in recovery experienced abuse, experienced trauma. And it's connected with the mental health stuff, and it's connected with the addiction stuff. They all go together like best friends, horrible best friends, trauma, and the mental health issues and addiction. And so I have compassion not just for me, but for every person who has had to live this story. We approach it with gentleness and kindness, and it's okay if we're not okay. You know, if this is something that you can personally relate to, I want you to tell yourself every time that you start judging yourself for it or having this conversation in your head of, you know, why am I like this? I have compassion for me. I have compassion for the woman or the man who went through this. I have compassion for the person who experienced these things. I have compassion for the person who needs to take medication or who isn't always okay. I'm alive. I can work on this tomorrow if I'm alive today. I have a really soft spot in my heart for this place, for this topic. This was the hardest thing for me to overcome, and it was my biggest fear. My biggest fear has always in the background has been, am I going to have a psychotic episode again? Is something going to happen that makes me mentally not well? I do everything I can. I created a business just so I could have a workspace that would be calm and peaceful. I created a bubble for myself at White Feather, and it's my bubble of peace and my bubble of happiness. I was blessed in being able to do that. You know, everything that I do, my Reiki that I do, playing with the crystals, doing Course in Miracles, reading all the books, all the spiritual teachers, the Louise Hay, Wayne Dyer, everything that I do, and all the meditation and the shamanic work and the shamanic journeys and that taking other people on these things as well, and being into sound therapy and being into drumming. Do you know what all of it about where it's based for me is? My mental health and my wellness. I am an example that we can get to the other side with this, that there are positive coping tools. Drumming was a great one for me because I struggled with meditation, but drumming actually causes spontaneous meditation without us even realizing that it causes spontaneous meditation, because what happens is we become so focused on trying to be in rhythm with everyone else, and we can get into this trance-like space that's just amazing, and it's actually called spontaneous meditation. It's the same thing that happens when we do artwork. It doesn't matter whether you're coloring in a coloring book or whether you're creating something yourself. It causes spontaneous meditation, the same as doing like beadwork or craft work or making jewelry, things like that. We're so focused on what we're doing. We're so focused on the next color that we're creating that we forget about our problems for a while, and we go into what's called spontaneous meditation, where we are totally present with what we're doing instead of our mind being in 100 million different places. Yeah, you know, the drumming, the artwork, the creative projects, all that stuff causes spontaneous meditation. If you want to start working on learning how to bring yourself to center, learning how to not be stuck in the anxiety, learning how to not be stuck in the PTSD triggers, these are all, everything I do in my business, everything I do, literally they're all the tools that I used to bring myself back from the brink of total and utter destruction. Because when I started getting clean and sober, I did not have coping tools for how to deal with my anxiety, my PTSD, my depression, all of that stuff. You know, the depression was interesting. The depression, it wasn't just that the drugs and alcohol went away and then the depression went away. It didn't happen like that. There's a lot of counseling involved with it. But a big thing before counseling, because I couldn't get any counseling until around 2015. So way before that even, one of the big things that helped with it was I read an Eckhart Tolle book. I read the book, The New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. He's got another book, The Power of Now, that teaches the same thing. And basically in that book, it was the first time I became aware of the fact that my mind is thinking all day long without me realizing it. Oh, he said something in the book where he was talking about his busy mind and how it never shuts up. And within that same day, I'm like, I've got a busy mind and it never shuts up too. And then I started noticing that a lot of my thoughts were really negative and really spun me down into negative places. Like I would catastrophize. So one bad thing happens and then I think another bad thing's going to happen. The worst thing's going to happen and I'm going to be homeless and I'm going to have nothing and I just want to kill myself. That was literally what happened to me. When one bad thing happened, I would catastrophize to the worst case scenario for everything, a whole bunch of things going wrong in a row. I would assume they were all going to happen. And so I started to meditate like Eckhart Tolle had recommended. I started learning how to, I wasn't good at it. I would always start thinking. I'd be sitting there for maybe 2 minutes at the most. And then I'd start thinking, and I might be thinking for 5 or 10 minutes and I'd recognize, oh yeah, I'm chattering. I'm supposed to be trying to be quiet. So I'd go back to trying to be quiet in my mind. And then my mind would start chattering and I'd go back to trying to be quiet when I noticed. And I just kept pulling myself back. It didn't matter whether it took me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long to notice that my mind was chattering. I started to notice that my mind was chattering. Well, one of the side effects of doing this was that in my waking day, while I was walking down the street and catastrophizing in my head, where I used to be 100% unaware that I was doing that, I started to become aware of the fact that I was doing that. And I'd force the thoughts out of my head. So I'd like breathe in the words peace and healing and exhale the words letting go, or force a nice mantra into my head. Or I would literally start saying nice things to myself. Or I would say, Tracey, that's not going to happen. This is not a realistic fear that you're having right now. I would have a conversation with myself that was different than the catastrophizing that was going on in my head. Because one bad thing happening would spiral into months and months of me being depressed. And I started to become aware of it. And it was honestly through meditation that started happening. And then I learned Reiki while I was down there as well, right around the same kind of time, maybe a little bit after learning meditation, but not long. And Reiki, I'm trying to be present with a person for like 45 minutes while I'm doing a Reiki session with them, 100% present. Well, that's all meditation is being present with what you're doing for an extended period of time. You can do anything. You can do walking meditation as long as you're present with what you're doing and not thinking and having conversation in your head about all sorts of other things. You're just thinking about how your feet feel on the ground, how the air feels on your skin, how your body feels as you breathe in and you breathe out, and feeling the ground on your feet as you're walking. That's a walking meditation. And if you start to think about work or start to think about the laundry or picking up the kids, you stop and you come back to just being present with walking. Meditation doesn't always have to be done sitting in a chair listening to some, soft music, trying not to think. You can meditate while making a salad, but you just think about making the salad and you just be present with it. How does the lettuce feel? How do the onions feel as you cut them? What do they smell like? Where did they come from? Who was the farmer that brought these things to you in the grocery store? Where are they from? What does the texture feel like? So if we can be present with it, making a salad can be a form of meditation. But normally what happens when we make a salad, because we've done it 500 million times before, is we're thinking about the argument we had with someone earlier. We're putting ourselves down in our head or thinking about the thing we have to do tomorrow, not being present. Learning how to be present. I had no idea I had no idea why the universe was telling me to do all the things that I was doing when I lived down in Arizona, but it led me on that path. It's like, hey, Tracey, go to a meditation. Hey, Tracey, learn about crystals. Hey, Tracey, learn about Reiki. Hey, Tracey, learn about shamanic work. All of this stuff, and drumming. I got exposed to drumming on that adventure as well. All of this stuff I got exposed to, and all of it made me feel really good. And I didn't realize at the time why, but I know now looking back that all of it was like spontaneous meditation type stuff. It was the universe teaching me how to slow down. And it was telling me to be healthier and to eat more healthy and to be mindful of what I was putting into my body. It helped. It helps a lot. It doesn't mean that I'm not prone for the rest of my life to something happening with my mental health stuff. I'm 100% aware of that. But I'm doing my very best to rein it in and keep it under control with the tools that I have. So the tools are going to be different for everyone. You might like coloring in a coloring book. You might like making jewelry. You might like journaling. You could like doing sports, doing martial arts. Actually, martial arts is an excellent activity. There's tons of different things. You could enjoy making pottery. I don't care what it is. All of these things, though, they're actually things that help us to balancing our mental health, especially when we struggle with it. Most importantly, if you experience mental health struggles at all, I want you to have compassion for you. I want you to remind yourself that you're totally normal. You're okay, even when you're not okay. You're worthy of love. You're just as worthy as every other person on this planet. And I want you to tell yourself that you love you. I want you to love the you who experiences that. You don't have to love the experience, but please learn to love the one who experiences that and is surviving it. A warrior. Sinead O'Connor was a warrior. My heart hurts today. My heart hurts today in her passing yesterday. I'm going to actually pop something up here. This is a quote from one of my favorite songs by Sinead. I think it was made in around 2014. I'm not sure. But the song is called 8 Good Reasons. And the lyric, there's this one set here. I'm not from this place. I'm from a different time, different space. And it's real uncomfortable to be stuck somewhere you just don't belong. I know myself. I can relate to those words so much. I felt for almost all of my life that I didn't belong, and I felt I was different, and I felt that there was something wrong with me. I've honestly felt like I was from somewhere out there, and I think maybe we all are actually. Maybe I just want to go home to God. Maybe that's all I ever wanted. And I feel like what Sinead was saying with her lyrics here in this song. If you've never listened to the song 8 Good Reasons, actually watch the YouTube video, the real YouTube video that goes with it, the one that she made. It's an amazing video. It's awesome. Speaks to my heart. That song is actually part of my own recovery, and it's probably my favorite song ever by her. Even above Nothing Compares to You, which is the one everyone goes nuts over, but I can so relate to this song. Anyways, yeah. And I think a lot of us who are empaths and who have struggled, and I think a lot of people just feel like they don't exactly belong here. And that's part of what makes it hard. I'm not entirely sure that we do. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So the spiritual being part of us just wants to go home where it's nothing but unconditional love. And being with the people that we love and being with the energy that we love and feeling healed and feeling whole. Earth is not a whole experience. It's this very broken, jagged, human, raw experience. It's not like just being in eternal bliss and eternal peace and eternal healing. No wonder we feel at times like we don't belong. I want you to know, if you're watching this video, that you're important and we need you here. We very much need you here. You're needed. Your light is needed. Your story is needed. You're worthy of love. You always were. I want you to give yourself a big hug right now, like this. Send yourself a lot of love. Feel the love that I'm sending to you right now. Take it into your heart. I hope that you have a blessed day, a blessed evening, wherever you are right now when you're watching this or listening to this. Be good to yourself. You're worth it. You always were.